Aztec mysteries have haunted history for centuries, from temples carved with impossible precision to artifacts that defy explanation. This video explores secrets the Spanish tried to erase, rituals, hidden chambers, prophetic symbols, and skulls that seem to whisper from the past. Each discovery peels back layers of a civilization both brilliant and terrifying, revealing practices and enigmas that challenge everything we thought we knew about Tenochtitlan. As we examine these remnants of power, belief, and fear, the line between history and legend blurs, leaving questions that echo across time. What truly happened behind the walls of Aztec temples, and what knowledge has been lost forever? The answers or the mysteries that remain unfold before your eyes. The Skull Tower beneath Mexico City. Beneath the busy streets of Mexico City, hidden under centuries of soil, a structure emerged that seemed to defy both reason and expectation. When archaeologists began excavating near the old center of the capital in 2015, they expected to find traces of temples or ceremonial platform. What they uncovered instead was a massive wall of human skulls, each one carefully mortared in place, staring outward as if frozen in some eternal vigil. The discovery was startling not only because of the sheer number of skulls, but also because it forced a reconsideration of what scholars thought they knew about Aztec rituals. Chroniclers from the 16th century had written of Tzompantli, great racks where skulls of sacrificial victims were displayed in rows. Yet here, sealed away beneath layers of stone and earth, was undeniable evidence that such towers had existed, their grim faces arranged into a cylindrical wall nearly 6 meters across. As the excavation deepened, the numbers grew. First, a few dozen, then hundreds, and eventually over 600 skulls were documented within the section exposed to daylight. Some belonged to men in their prime, others to women, and even young children. The presence of children was especially unsettling, as it contradicted earlier theories that sacrificial victims were only warriors captured in battle. Each skull had been stripped of its flesh, carefully drilled to allow wooden supports to pass through, and then set in mortar to form the circular wall. The tower was identified as part of the Tzompantli, a massive skull rack described by Spanish conquerors who entered Tenochtitlan in 1519. Bernal Diaz del Castillo, one of Hernan Cortez's men, wrote of walking past a great wall filled with countless skulls, so many that the sight was overwhelming. At the time, Europeans dismissed his words as exaggeration born of fear or wonder. The excavation, however, showed that such descriptions were grounded in reality, and perhaps even understated, for the number of skulls incorporated into the structure was far greater than most had believed possible. What made the tower even more mysterious was its placement. It stood close to the Templo Mayor, the central temple of the Aztec capital, where rituals to the gods Huitzilopochtli and Tlaloc were performed. The symbolism is difficult to interpret with certainty. To the Aztecs, the offering of human life was a way of ensuring the sun continued to rise, a contract between the people and the gods that demanded constant renewal. Yet the form of this tower suggests something more than ritual necessity, as if the skulls themselves were meant to embody divine power and project it outward into the city. The Spanish, upon conquering Tenochtitlan, worked quickly to dismantle such structures, both physically and symbolically. For them, the Skull Tower was a monument to barbarity, proof of a society they claimed needed to be erased and remade. For centuries, the Tzompantli survived only in fragmented accounts, half dismissed as fantasy and half whispered about in cautionary tales. That it re-emerged at all beneath the modern city is a testament to the resilience of the buried past, refusing to stay silent. Even now, the tower raises more questions than it answers. Why did the Aztecs choose to immortalize the dead in this way, fusing them into the very architecture of their sacred space? Were the skulls honored as intermediaries between worlds, or were they warnings meant to project terror into the hearts of enemies? The inclusion of women and children suggests a meaning that stretched beyond the battlefield, one that scholars still struggle to decode. Some see it as a communal offering, a way of binding the entire society into the cosmic cycle, while others argue it reflects darker rituals that remain barely understood. The structure's very survival is another enigma. In a city layered with centuries of construction, demolition, and rebuilding, how did this fragile wall of bone endure? Its presence suggests that the Spanish may not have been able to destroy everything they sought to erase. Perhaps sections were concealed beneath hurried layers of rubble, forgotten by those who built over them, until the weight of time itself hid the evidence from view. Standing before the excavated remains, it is impossible not to feel the tension between history and mystery. Here are the skulls of hundreds of people who lived and died centuries ago, transformed into building blocks of a monument that the Spanish conquerors wanted the world to forget. Each hollow gaze seems to hold secrets that no text or chronicle can fully explain, secrets of belief, power, and fear woven into the very fabric of the Aztec Empire. And yet, as the tower's skulls stare silently into the present, they leave us wondering what forgotten truths still lie buried beneath the streets of Mexico City. The vanishing codices. In the flames of conquest, the Aztec codices disappeared. Bonfires lit by Spanish hands consumed hundreds of painted manuscripts, each page a woven record of memory and meaning that had taken generations to create. The sight of these fragile books turning to smoke marked not only the destruction of objects, but the silencing of entire voices, leaving behind an emptiness that still haunts the history of Mesoamerica. These books, painted on deerskin or on sheets of bark, folded like accordions, once carried entire worlds of knowledge. Brilliant pigments, shaped into images, told of rulers and battles, the gods and their cycles, the stars above, and the sacred calendar that guided daily life. Unlike European manuscripts filled with lines of writing, the Aztec codices spoke in pictures, combining artistry and language so that every scene carried layers of meaning. To watch them vanish was to see centuries of wisdom erased in an instant. Spanish accounts described the bonfires, yet gave little sense of what was erased. Some friars wrote of their horror at seeing idols and texts burned together, while others celebrated the act as a triumph over what they called pagan knowledge. What remains absent is any description detailed enough to let us imagine the lost manuscripts, only scattered references that hint at the immensity of what was destroyed. Each record of a burning is itself an admission of silence, acknowledging the act without preserving the content. What fragments survive hint at astronomy, lore, myth, and memory. The rare codices that escape destruction describe how the Aztecs measured time, how they honored their gods, and how they recorded the genealogies of their rulers. A few sheets show ritual sacrifices, others depict celestial charts with careful precision, yet even these surviving pieces feel incomplete, as though torn from a much larger story that no longer exists. The sense of something missing is unavoidable. Each fragment is a doorway that opens into nothingness. Among the most haunting is the Codex Borbonicus, preserved by chance rather than intention. It holds vibrant images of priests counting the sacred days, their rituals aligned with the shifting seasons and the demands of unseen powers. Every line is deliberate, every symbol placed with care, yet entire sections appear to allude to traditions no longer understood. To study it is to recognize how much context was stripped away when the other codices were consigned to fire, leaving mysteries that may never be unraveled. Every blank space between these survivors suggests countless voices silenced. Imagine the lost records of medicine, the maps of conquered lands, or the stories told of the people before the empire's rise. None of these can be recovered, and yet their absence is felt in the gaps of what remains. The silence that surrounds the codices is not empty, but one that presses heavily, reminding us of all that was taken. Even the Spanish friars who once condemned them sometimes admitted unease. Bernardino de Sahagún, who documented Aztec life in the Florentine Codex, relied heavily on indigenous informants because the original books were gone. He recognized that in destroying the texts, the colonizers had also destroyed a pathway into understanding the very people they sought to convert. His own work, though immense, remains filtered through translation and perspective, unable to replace what the Aztecs themselves had recorded. Modern scholars are left chasing shadows, piecing fragments into ghostly outlines. They analyze the surviving codices with care, debating the meanings of symbols, tracing the journeys of these fragile books across centuries of displacement, and wondering what larger traditions once surrounded them. Every discovery feels partial, like recovering a few surviving pages of an immense library reduced to ash, leaving researchers suspended between glimpses of clarity and endless questions. The unanswered question is what vanished knowledge could have changed our understanding forever. Did the Aztecs record stories of earlier civilizations, or maps of lands now unknown? Were there instructions for rituals no longer remembered, or insights into astronomy that would alter how we view the past? Each possibility deepens the mystery, for with every thought of what might have been, the loss grows heavier and the silence more profound. Still, the faint memory of these vanished books lingers, leaving the unsettling sense that entire histories remain hidden in smoke, waiting for a voice that will never return. The sacred calendar stone, at the heart of Mexico City's main square, rests a monument unlike any other, a vast circular stone whose surface is filled with intricate carvings that seem to breathe with the pulse of time itself. Known widely as the Aztec sunstone or calendar stone, it has stood as one of the most recognized relics of Mesoamerican culture. Yet beneath its fame lies an enigma that continues to puzzle all who confront it. Carved from a single block of basalt, the massive disc measures more than 3.5 meters across and weighs over 20 tons, a weight that seems almost impossible for the tools and methods of its age. The stone was unearthed in 1790 near the ruins of the Templo Mayor, buried face down as though hidden deliberately, and since then it has haunted scholars with questions about its true purpose. Dominating the stone's face is the central visage, often interpreted as Tonatiuh, the sun god, his mouth opened in a shape that recalls the blade of sacrifice, and his eyes glaring with an intensity that seems to pierce through centuries. Around him spread concentric patterns that expand outward like ripples, each ring crowded with symbols that evoke both cosmic cycles and human destiny. Encircling this grim face are concentric rings filled with glyphs that scholars still struggle to decode, marks that represent not only days and celestial events, but forces of destruction, as though the stone were less a calendar of time and more a warning of inevitable cataclysm. The arrangement suggests a system of order, yet the meaning refuses to rest in certainty. Every symbol seems precise, yet their collective meaning resists a final explanation, offering fragments that hint at an entire cosmology now only half remembered. Some figures appear to mark the passage of the 260-day ritual calendar, others the 365-day solar year, but together they form a design whose symmetry and scale exceed any simple record of days. Some researchers argue the calendar stone is not a calendar at all, but a cosmic map of destruction and rebirth, its rings aligned with myths of worlds that came before and perished. According to this interpretation, the disc preserves the story of the 5 suns, epochs of creation and annihilation that preceded the present age. Others insist its patterns record astronomical cycles, linking human ritual to the heavens, each glyph a marker of celestial movements that ruled when ceremonies should be performed and when sacrifices were demanded. In this reading, the stone was less a prophecy than a manual for sustaining harmony between earth and sky. Yet, despite centuries of study, the disc holds its silence, refusing to yield a single definitive story, as if the answers carved in its basalt face were meant to remain hidden in plain sight. The tension between its clarity of form and its mystery of meaning continues to unsettle, like a voice speaking in a language just beyond comprehension. What makes this silence more unsettling is the weight of prophecy embedded within its design, the suggestion that what it records is not only the past, but the shadow of what is yet to come. The stone does not describe a stable universe. It describes cycles of collapse and renewal, suggesting that the world itself is fragile and temporary. Legends speak of suns that rose and fell before the world we know, each destroyed in fire, wind, or flood, each epoch leaving ruins beneath the memory of the next. The calendar stone's rings seem to echo these legends, making it a record of endings as much as beginnings. If the stone truly charts these past cataclysms, it may also conceal the warning of another still to come, the prophecy of a future destruction awaiting its moment to unfold. This possibility has given the disc an aura of dread, as if it marks not only what has been, but what must be. Even now, visitors who stand before its carved rings often describe a strange sensation, as though the stone watches in return, its central face unblinking and eternal. To look upon it is to feel time stretch in both directions, the past collapsing into the future in a circle with no escape. In its immovable weight lies a paradox. It is both a relic of a fallen empire and a voice that seems unending, a carved stone that continues to demand attention long after its makers vanished. It refuses to settle into the silence of a museum piece, instead exerting a pull that suggests its work is unfinished. So the stone remains, its circles turning silently in the imagination, carrying with them the unsettling question of whether its prophecy is still unfolding around us. The disappearance of Aztlan. Long before the Aztec Empire rose in the Valley of Mexico, their ancestors spoke of a homeland called Aztlan, a place whose memory lingered in song and legend, even when its location slipped into uncertainty. This origin point was said to be the cradle of the Mexica, the starting place of the long migration that would end in the foundation of Tenochtitlan. The name Aztlan evokes an island, a place of white herons, a fertile region surrounded by water where beauty and abundance shaped the lives of its people. In the language of the Nahua, its syllables conjure brightness and purity, a vision of an ancestral paradise that seemed destined to fade once abandoned. Stories describe it as both paradise and prison, a land abundant in beauty, yet fated to be left behind under the shadow of divine instruction. The Mexica were said to dwell there in comfort until the gods demanded they set out toward a new destiny, leaving their homeland forever behind. From this mysterious homeland, the Mexica are said to have set out on a migration that would shape history, carrying with them traditions, rituals, and memories that hardened into identity as they journeyed south. Their long wandering through valleys, deserts, and highlands became as formative as the land they had departed. Yet the exact location of Aztlan has never been fixed on any map, slipping between rivers, deserts, and coastlines as though it resisted capture. Every attempt to anchor it in geography has ended in contradiction, leaving scholars and storytellers chasing a horizon that never settles. Some accounts speak of 7 caves, Chicamostoc, said to be the birthplace of the Nahua peoples, and often linked to Aztlan as though both names were fragments of the same origin story. Some chroniclers after the conquest suggested it lay to the north, beyond deserts that stretched endlessly, pointing to regions near present-day Nayarit, or even farther into what is now the American Southwest. These accounts describe an arduous migration that crossed immense distances, echoing the epic scale of the legend itself. Others believed it was a place closer at hand, hidden in marshes or valleys that defied easy discovery, a homeland concealed by the shifting memory of generations. For them, Aztlan was never far in space, but always distant in time, unreachable because it belonged to a world that no longer existed. What deepens the mystery is the way Aztlan straddles myth and memory, half legend, half history. Its details reshaped each time the story was told. Its disappearance is not simply physical, but conceptual, a place receding into a dream as much as into geography. Archaeologists have searched for clues in ruins and oral traditions, yet the trail always fades into uncertainty, as though the act of pursuit pushes the homeland farther away. The absence of material proof leaves only fragments of stories, names, and echoes scattered like broken pieces of a forgotten map. The absence of clear evidence has not silenced the story, but made it echo more powerfully across time, feeding speculation and imagination alike. Aztlan remains most vivid where it cannot be grasped, thriving in the tension between what is remembered and what is lost. In Nahua accounts, the departure from Aztlan was guided by signs from the gods, omens carried by animals, and stars that pointed the way forward. Each omen served as a reminder that their journey was not of choice, but of fate. ordered by powers greater than themselves. Each step away from the homeland seemed to deepen the bond of memory, transforming absence into identity. The further the Mexica moved, the stronger the legend of Aztlan grew, until its shadow became inseparable from their story of origin. For the Mexica, the memory of Aztlan became less a question of geography than a symbol of destiny, the emblem of a people chosen to endure hardship and to build an empire that would rival the greatness of their lost homeland. In this way, the homeland lived on, not in soil or stone, but in the stories that shaped their rise. Spanish chroniclers recorded variations of the tale, but their descriptions often conflicted with indigenous traditions, leaving behind layers of narrative that only thickened the mystery. Aztlan lingers, neither found nor forgotten, a vanished homeland that continues to shift like a mirage, calling to those who seek it, yet dissolving whenever they draw near. The mysterious cry of La Llorona. In countless towns across Mexico, from the highland valleys to the banks of the great rivers, a single tale has endured longer than many empires. The sound of a woman's mournful cry echoing through the night. The story is always told in hushed tones, as if the very act of repeating it might summon the weeping figure said to wander near waterways, her voice rising like a warning carried by the wind. Legends describe a woman dressed in white, her face veiled by darkness, whose restless spirit roams in search of her drowned children. Some say she walks endlessly along riverbanks, clutching at the air as though grasping for what has been lost. Others insist her cry is not only one of grief, but also of rage, directed at those who cross her path without respect or caution. Colonial chroniclers recorded whispers of her as early as the 16th century, when Spanish priests wrote of a ghostly woman heard wailing on the streets of Mexico City before the fall of Tenochtitlan. To them, her sorrow seemed a portent of devastation, a sign that the world was about to change forever. These early accounts tied her fate to the upheaval of conquest, embedding her story into both history and prophecy. Accounts from that period also describe entire neighborhoods falling silent at night when the cries were said to rise, as though whole communities held their breath in fearful expectation. For families living near rivers, canals, and lakes, the legend became part of daily life, carried from generation to generation as both a warning and a comfort. Children were told not to wander too close to the water after dark, for La Llorona might mistake them for her own and drag them away. Even adults confessed to quickening their steps when her cries were said to rise over the currents, believing her presence was a danger that could not be explained. Night after night, reports surfaced from those who claimed to have heard her wail stretch across the silence, beginning faint and low, then swelling into a heart-stopping scream before fading again into the dark. The pattern was rarely broken. It was always near water, always cloaked in the hours before dawn, and always described as a sound unlike anything else in the natural world. Folklorists argue that the story of La Llorona blends older indigenous traditions with Spanish influences, a convergence of pre-Hispanic deities of water and motherhood with the Catholic figure of the penitent sinner. To them, she is not one spirit but many, her tale absorbing centuries of cultural memory into one haunting image. Yet for all the scholarly explanations, the legend refuses to lose its edge of fear. Yet testimonies continue to emerge from those who insist the story is more than folklore. Police reports, newspapers, and oral histories describe encounters in both rural villages and crowded cities, always echoing the same chilling details of cries heard in the night with no living source to be found. While skeptics attribute the sounds to wind, animals, or the power of suggestion, the persistence of these accounts gives the legend a weight that speculation alone cannot erase. Among the most chilling aspects of La Llorona's cry is its elusive nature. Witnesses often say the sound seems near, then impossibly far, shifting direction as though the spirit were circling unseen. Others claim it carries a power to paralyze those who hear it, leaving them rooted in place as the wailing rises and falls until silence returns. It is not only the sound itself that terrifies, but the way it bends the very sense of space and presence around it. What remains unresolved is whether La Llorona is a figure of myth shaped entirely by human fear, or whether the cries themselves point to something that still lingers along the waterways of Mexico. The legend has never been silenced, and as long as people continue to hear the sorrowful wail drifting through the night, the mystery of La Llorona will remain an unsettling presence that refuses to fade. Her voice may belong to legend, but the echo of her cry still unsettles those who listen, as if the boundary between story and reality grows thinner with every haunting wail. The Obsidian Mirror of Tezcatlipoca. Among the treasures revered by the Aztecs, few carried as much dread and fascination as the obsidian mirrors linked to Tezcatlipoca, the god whose name means smoking mirror. These objects, polished to a dark liquid shine, were believed to be more than reflective surfaces. They were thought to open windows into hidden truths, offering glimpses of fate and shadows of the unseen. Crafted from volcanic glass born in the Earth's violent eruptions, the mirrors embodied both creation and destruction. The deep black stone, sharp when broken yet smooth when polished, was a natural paradox, and this duality reflected Tezcatlipoca himself, a god of both chaos and order, both punishment and protection. For the Aztecs, to look into such a mirror was to stand at the threshold of power that could not easily be controlled. To the Aztec mind, reflections were never simple imitations of reality. They were thought to capture fragments of the soul, bending what was human into forms that belonged to the divine or the dangerous. A surface that revealed the self could also conceal spirits waiting to intrude, so gazing into obsidian was never a casual act. It was a practice surrounded by ritual, guarded by belief, and feared for the consequences it might bring. Ritual accounts speak of priests gazing into mirrors during ceremonies meant to divine the future or interpret the will of the gods. In the dim light of temples, the polished obsidian would catch only the faintest glimmers of fire, distorting the world into shifting shadows. Witnesses described the mirror as showing more than mere faces. It was said to reveal visions of battles, omens of disaster, and warnings of betrayal. Foreign observers later recorded their impressions of these objects, though often through the lens of their own fears and judgments. When Spanish chroniclers encountered the mirrors, they described them as tools of sorcery, signs of superstition that needed to be eradicated. Yet even as they condemned them, they admitted that the air around such rituals seemed charged with a presence that could not be dismissed. Archaeological discoveries have uncovered obsidian mirrors in burial sites, suggesting they were placed with the dead as companions for the soul's passage into the afterlife. Their inclusion in tombs hints at a belief that the mirror could serve as a guide beyond death, reflecting not only the living world, but also the path into realms unseen. Legends surrounding Tezcatlipoca describe the god himself holding a smoking mirror, using it to see into the hearts of men and the destinies of empires. He was said to appear on its dark surface, whispering truths that tested the courage of rulers. In these stories, the mirror was not just an object, but an extension of the god's will, a medium through which divine judgment became visible. One story tells of rulers consulting the mirror before making decisions of war or alliance, seeking guidance but fearing the answers they might find. The visions were rarely comforting. Instead, they carried hints of doom, reminding those in power that even their strength was fragile before the gaze of the gods. To hold such a mirror was to hold responsibility that few could endure without trembling. Some accounts suggest that these mirrors were sometimes veiled when not in use, hidden beneath cloths to prevent unwanted visions from spilling into ordinary life. The act of covering them implies that even when dormant, they were regarded as dangerously active, objects too potent to leave exposed in the presence of the unprepared. What unsettles researchers today is how widespread these mirrors were, and how consistently they were associated with both prophecy and terror. Across different accounts, they are linked not only to Tezcatlipoca, but also to practices of shamanic healing and communication with the dead. The continuity of these associations suggests that their role was deeply embedded in Aztec cosmology, making them more than mere ritual props. Even now, obsidian mirrors survive in museums and collections, their surfaces gleaming with the same darkness that once drew the eyes of priests and kings. Visitors who stand before them often remark on the uncanny sensation of being watched, as though the mirror were more than an object, as though the stone itself still held whispers of the visions it once revealed. The mystery endures in the quiet sheen of black glass, waiting for anyone brave enough to face what might look back from within its depths. The serpent wall of Tenochtitlan. Under the fierce glare of the sun in Tenochtitlan, the stones of the serpent wall rise in stark silence, their carved forms suggesting a world where myth and power blended seamlessly into daily life. The wall once encircled the heart of the sacred precinct, marking the edge of temples and shrines where rituals unfolded before the eyes of thousands. Its presence was as commanding as the temples it guarded, an architectural boundary that carried both awe and fear. Along its length, sculpted serpents coil in an endless procession, their jaws agape as if frozen mid-strike, teeth and scales captured in stone by the hands of master artisans. Each figure stretches outward, side by side, until the line becomes a living river of serpentine bodies, slithering without movement. To those who entered the precinct, the wall gave the impression of crossing through a threshold guarded by creatures that were never fully still. To those who walked past it centuries ago, the wall was more than stone, it was a boundary between worlds. On one side lay the city of canals and markets, vibrant with voices and colour, while on the other rose the sacred zone where gods demanded sacrifice and priests read omens in blood and smoke. The serpents embodied that divide, their bodies interlaced with symbolism tied to earth, water, and the underworld, making the wall not simply a construction, but a passage into realms of meaning. Foreign conquerors who first laid eyes on the serpents described unease, as though the city itself were guarded by living creatures. Their chronicles spoke of eyes that seemed to glint, of mouths that seemed poised to bite, and of a presence that was felt as much as seen. To them, the wall was unlike anything in Europe, neither defensive nor decorative in any familiar sense, but rather an emblem of something older, stranger, and far more unsettling. At ceremonial times, torches cast shadows across the carvings, making the serpent seem to writhe in the flickering light. Witnesses described processions of priests passing before the wall, their chants rising as smoke curled upward, the carved jaws catching the glow of fire. In those moments, the line between stone and living form blurred, and the wall itself seemed to awaken, as if drawing strength from the rituals that unfolded at its feet. Scholars later debated whether the wall symbolized defense against physical enemies or protection from darker, unseen forces. Some saw it as a shield that encircled the sacred core of the city, while others believed it acted as a magical barrier to hold back chaos, hunger, or invading spirits. The dual nature of the serpent in Aztec, thought as both creator and destroyer, both giver of life and taker of it, suggested that its meaning was not fixed, but layered, shifting like scales catching the light. Fragments of the structure that survive today still bear the traces of paint, hinting that its serpents once gleamed with colour and menace. Hints of red and green pigment cling to the stone, suggesting that their scales once shimmered with vitality, and that their fangs may have dripped with painted blood to reinforce their fearsome aspect. The original vision would have been overwhelming, a wall not only of stone, but of colour, form, and symbol, pressing upon those who entered with the weight of the divine. Even stripped of its original grandeur, the wall retains an uncanny gravity, drawing attention as if it carries a lingering presence. Visitors who stand before the surviving fragments in Mexico City's archaeological zone describe an atmosphere that is difficult to explain, as though the carved serpents still watch, their silence charged with intent. Despite centuries of ruin and reconstruction, the sense of boundary remains, a line that separates the ordinary from the sacred. What unsettles those who study the wall is not merely its size, but the silence surrounding its deeper purpose. No text explains its full significance. No record tells precisely what the Aztecs believed the serpents held back or guarded. The mystery endures not only in the missing sections of the wall, but in the absence of certainty, leaving a structure that continues to suggest more than it reveals. The serpent wall of Tenochtitlan still stands as both ruin and riddle, its coiling guardians forever poised at the edge of memory, daring those who approach to wonder what they were truly meant to keep contained. The Templo Mayor's hidden chambers. Deep under Mexico City's surface, remnants of the Templo Mayor lie in silence, holding stories still half buried. Once the spiritual heart of the Aztec capital of Tenochtitlan, the temple stood as a towering symbol of devotion and power, layered over centuries as rulers rebuilt it again and again. Each expansion covered what came before, creating a monument that was both vertical and hidden, as though each generation meant to guard its secrets in stone. Successive layers of soil uncovered offerings of obsidian, shells, and bones that seemed placed with precise intent. Archaeologists working at the site since the late 20th century have unearthed hundreds of ritual deposits arranged in ways that remain puzzling, their exact meanings eluding even the most careful study. Some deposits held animals not native to the valley, their remains transported from far-off lands and buried in carefully marked containers, suggesting ceremonies whose purposes are still uncertain. Records show that some of these deposits contained species from the Gulf of Mexico and the Pacific coast, evidence of a far-reaching network devoted to feeding the temple's sacred demands. Inside the temple's foundations, staircases appeared that led into rooms untouched for centuries. These passageways descended into chambers where murals once glowed with red and blue pigments, long faded but still hinting at sacred stories. Traces of fire pits, smashed pottery, and tools lay where they had last been used, leaving the impression that the people who left them behind had not intended to return. Revealed artifacts suggest ceremonies meant to link the mortal world with forces beyond sight. Some chambers contained jaguar bones, serpent effigies, and carved stone discs marked with spirals, symbols that may have represented cosmic cycles. Others held human skulls fitted with turquoise mosaics, their hollow eyes staring upward as though awaiting a divine presence. Such arrangements imply an order that was deliberate, yet their meaning has resisted final interpretation. In the central excavation zone, blocked entrances hinted at chambers deliberately concealed. Sealed doorways made of stone slabs suggested that access was meant to be cut off, either to protect what lay within or to ensure that no one disturbed the dead. Even now, researchers suspect that unopened rooms remain beyond the walls already uncovered, waiting to reveal whatever treasures or terrors were locked away centuries ago. Walls, once hidden, displayed altars, darkened by traces of ritual acts, now only guessed at. Faint scorch marks, layers of ash, and carved reliefs of serpents and deities marked places where ceremonies once unfolded in dim light. The atmosphere of those enclosed spaces must have been charged with smoke, chanting, and offerings, though what precisely occurred remains outside the reach of written history. Among these findings, jade fragments, knives, and human remains formed unsettling patterns. In some cases, the bodies of children were discovered alongside jaguar skeletons, their placement suggesting that their sacrifices carried symbolic weight. Such discoveries trouble modern sensibilities, yet they reveal how the Aztec world bound human life to the sacred order of gods and nature. Descending further, archaeologists noted that each temple phase buried the last, creating a labyrinth of history. Every reconstruction added new staircases, altars, and chambers, while entombing the older structures beneath. This process built not only a towering pyramid, but also a layered archive of rituals, each chamber holding its own moment in the city's unfolding story, preserved by the act of burial itself. Across the site today, fragments of carved serpents and faded paint still echo the grandeur above ground. Visitors who walk the excavated precinct glimpse what was once the ceremonial center of an empire, surrounded by temples, palaces, and plazas. Yet it is the unseen rooms, those still covered by earth or sealed behind walls, that keep the air of mystery alive. Secrets, yet unrevealed, linger below the modern city, as if the chambers themselves refuse to surrender their purpose. With every excavation, the Templo Mayor offers pieces of a puzzle, but never the whole, and the silence of the hidden rooms continues to resist the light of certainty, Long buried by centuries of soil and stone, the chambers of the Templo Mayor remained sealed, like eyes closed against the world of the living. The Great Flood Prophecies. Legends speak of a world undone by water, where mountains disappeared beneath endless waves and cities dissolved into silence. These stories, whispered across generations, describe not a single disaster, but a pattern of destruction that returned again and again, shaping how people understood the fragility of their existence. Each telling carried the warning that the earth itself could be swept clean when balance was lost. Ancient songs describe gods who reshaped the earth with storms so fierce that even the strongest temples crumbled. In these verses, the waters were not only destructive, but cleansing, preparing the way for a new order of time. The flood was remembered less as an accident of nature and more as a divine judgment, a cycle meant to remind humanity of its dependence on forces beyond control. In the visions of priests, floods marked the turning of ages, each catastrophe ending one sun and ushering in another. Among the 5 suns recorded in central Mexican cosmology, one was known as the Sun of Water, a world drowned when rain fell without end. Those who survived were said to be transformed into fish, carried into the next age as living proof that nothing remained untouched by the will of the gods. Seasonal floods around Lake Texcoco gave these prophecies a tangible weight, for each inundation reminded the Mexica that water could both sustain and destroy. Canals overflowed, homes sank into mud, and the city itself sometimes trembled on the brink of collapse, as if the great flood of the myths was rehearsed in smaller disasters that haunted daily life. Symbols carved into codices reveal swirling waves and broken suns, their painted forms showing cities submerged and skies darkened. These manuscripts, fragile and rare, preserved glimpses of how floods were remembered as the ultimate punishment, wiping away both kings and commoners. The imagery suggests more than myth, hinting at memories of real disasters amplified into cosmic cycles of destruction and renewal. Spanish chroniclers later compared these visions with the biblical deluge, noting how both traditions spoke of waters sent as judgment. Yet, unlike the singular flood of Genesis, the Aztec cycle promised repetition, a relentless rhythm of collapse and rebirth that offered no final rescue, only the certainty of return. Storms and rising waters appear as punishments woven into the story of creation, where human pride or neglect of ritual summoned nature's fury. In these narratives, floods were not random, but inevitable whenever harmony with the divine was broken. The warnings etched in memory taught that disaster could strike again if sacred obligations were ignored. Evidence of past floods can still be traced in the layers of sediment near ancient settlements, hinting that these prophecies may have roots in real events as well as myth. Colonial chronicles recall how these prophecies were whispered alongside forbidden rites, carried on in secret after the conquest when open worship was forbidden. Friars wrote of visions that terrified both natives and Europeans, describing predictions of deluges that would end all trace of empire. To suppress these voices was to erase a worldview that saw the flood not as a single past event, but as a destiny always threatening to return. Each retelling carries shadows of destruction, though details shift with the storyteller. In one account, torrents fell for years, drowning every field and leaving only mountains as islands. In another, seas rose without warning, swallowing entire valleys in a single night. The fluidity of these traditions makes it impossible to know whether they refer to one catastrophe, many, or to visions that existed only in sacred imagination. Celestial signs deepened the fear, for eclipses and strange patterns in the stars were seen as warnings that the drowning of the world was near. Priests read the heavens like a vast codex, where each darkened sun or unfamiliar alignment foretold waters waiting to reclaim the earth. Modern scholars trace echoes of these warnings in the calendars and myths that survived conquest and suppression. Some see reflections of geological events, floods, and storms remembered in symbolic form. Others interpret them as metaphors for political collapse or social upheaval. The truth remains elusive, for prophecy moves between fact and myth so seamlessly that no boundary can be clearly drawn. The prophecy closes with a vision of waters rising again, leaving open the question of whether the cycle has already begun. The crystal skulls. Hidden in vaults and private collections around the world, crystal skulls have long fascinated scholars, collectors, and those drawn to the unknown. These objects, carved with precise human features from nearly flawless quartz, seem to carry an aura that transcends their physical form. Despite modern tools capable of examining their structure, the origins of these skulls remain stubbornly resistant to definitive explanation. Each one appears both ancient and impossibly precise, a contradiction that fuels the intrigue surrounding them. Shimmering under light, the skulls reveal an almost unnatural clarity, as though their surfaces were polished to perfection by hands guided by knowledge now lost to time. Some reflect and refract in ways that seem to animate their hollow eye sockets, lending the impression of silent observation. This optical quality has led researchers to wonder whether they were designed with ceremonial or spiritual purpose in mind, a medium for contact with forces beyond human understanding. Accounts from explorers in the late 19th and early 20th centuries first brought the skulls to public attention. Figures like Anna Mitchell Hedges, who claimed to discover a skull in Belize in 1924, sparked headlines and debate, though verifiable evidence is often scant. Many skulls emerged in private collections rather than excavated contexts, leaving their provenance shrouded in uncertainty. Even today, the lack of archaeological documentation fuels the tension between belief and skepticism. Across continents, these artifacts have traveled from Central America to museums, auction houses, and clandestine exhibitions. Reports describe their movement through networks of collectors and dealers, each transaction leaving fragments of history obscured. Their global dispersal raises questions about how these objects were originally valued, preserved, and perhaps even revered, hinting at a history that stretches far beyond the hands that currently hold them. Debate persists among scholars regarding authenticity and purpose. Some argue that certain skulls are modern creations, carved in the 19th or 20th century to satisfy curiosity or profit, while others insist that at least a few originate in pre-Columbian Mesoamerica. Microscopic analysis and toolmark studies reveal inconsistencies, yet the conversation is complicated by the sheer craftsmanship and the mystical aura the skulls inspire. Evidence for their age and origin remains tantalizingly incomplete. Examinations using X-ray fluorescence have revealed trace elements in some skulls that correspond to geological sources in Central America, hinting at a connection to regions long inhabited by advanced Mesoamerican cultures. One skull, measuring nearly a foot in length, exhibits intricacies that surpass typical human carving techniques known at the time it was supposedly created. Its jawline, teeth, and cranial contours suggest a sophistication that invites questions about the skills of its makers. How such precision was achieved without advanced machinery remains a central puzzle, deepening the sense that the skulls occupy a liminal space between art, artifact, and enigma. Photographs from the 1,930 seconds show the skulls on display in London and New York, provoking fascination and incredulity among the public. Writers and journalists chronicled the events, often blending documented fact with speculation, further embedding the skulls into modern myth. The images, now historical records themselves, continue to captivate, suggesting that each generation encounters these artifacts as if discovering them anew. Origins remain elusive, complicated by a mixture of legend, misattribution, and confirmed historical evidence. While some skulls can be traced to 19th century workshops in Europe, others have more convincing Mesoamerican provenance. The uncertainty fuels their mystique, transforming them into objects not just of curiosity, but of ongoing investigation. Every examination raises new questions, leaving answers perpetually out of reach. Stories passed down through indigenous communities hint at spiritual significance tied to quartz and human likeness. Among the Nahua and Maya, quartz was believed to hold energy and insight, potentially explaining why skull-shaped carvings would hold ceremonial importance. Oral history preserves fragments of knowledge that might illuminate purpose. Yet the connections between these cultural practices and surviving crystal skulls remain ambiguous. Artifacts resembling skulls have been found in temple sites alongside ceremonial offerings, suggesting that these objects may have been part of rites lost to time but remembered in fragmentary cultural memory. Collectors and historians alike continue to search, display, and debate these enigmatic objects, drawn to the tension between their tangible reality and the mysteries surrounding them. Each skull seems to carry a story half told, a secret hovering just beyond comprehension, compelling those who encounter it to question what is known and what might remain forever hidden. The crystal skulls wait, silent and gleaming, as if guarding truths that no one has yet dared to fully uncover. The sacrificial knives. Carved from obsidian, the sacrificial knives of the Aztecs glimmer with a chilling perfection, their surfaces reflecting light in a way that seems almost alive. Each blade was painstakingly shaped, flaked, and polished to a sharpness capable of precise ritual use. Yet the artistry alone suggests reverence for the object beyond mere function. Archaeologists have uncovered knives with handles of bone, wood, or jade, each adorned with subtle carvings that hint at status, lineage, or divine favor. Edges polished to razor-sharp precision bear silent testimony to countless ceremonies, each marking a moment of transition or offering. Examination under magnification shows microscopic chips along the cutting surfaces, evidence that the knives were not decorative, but instruments of repeated use. The skill required to wield such tools without harming oneself elevates the ritual into a disciplined, almost sacred act, blending human intention with the lethal potential of the material. Priests once carried these instruments through crowded temple courts, their movements choreographed to the rhythm of drums and the cadence of chants. The knives were not wielded casually. Each gesture, each swing, followed a strict protocol designed to appease gods and maintain cosmic balance. Eyewitness accounts recorded by Spanish chroniclers describe ceremonies so precise that any deviation could be seen as blasphemy, capable of summoning divine wrath. Depictions in codices reveal the knives in symbolic tableaux, often alongside gods of death, sun, and war. In the Florentine Codex, figures hold obsidian blades above offerings, their stances formalized and almost theatrical. The visual records preserve more than ritual, they encode a cosmology in which sacrifice sustains the universe itself. In the chambers of Templo Mayor, fragments of obsidian knives were found alongside ceremonial masks and vessels, indicating that these tools were central to the rites performed at the empire's spiritual core. Excavations in Mexico City have revealed caches of blades intentionally buried, sometimes in groups of dozens, suggesting they were offerings themselves, retired from service only to continue their sacred function underground. Ritual bloodletting was not merely a show of devotion, it embodied a contract with the gods, a transaction in which life force flowed outward to sustain cosmic order. Chronicles recount that even minor deviations in the timing or location of a sacrifice could provoke omens interpreted as the displeasure of deities. The knives, as conduits of this force, were therefore more than tools, they were tangible points of contact between human and divine, their edges bridging two realms. Collectors and museums today display these knives as artifacts, yet their presence in glass cases cannot capture the gravity they held in the hands of priests. Some blades still carry stains of ancient ceremonies, invisible to the naked eye, but detectable through chemical analysis. Despite careful curation, the knives retain a sense of menace, their histories etched into the material itself. Scholars debate the significance of patterns found in their wear, questioning whether the frequency of use reveals hierarchy, ritual complexity, or an unknown code. Evidence of repeated sharpening suggests that the knives were maintained with meticulous care, each grind reinforcing their power. Observations indicate that specific blades may have been reserved for high-ranking ceremonies or for individuals of particular importance, reflecting a system of privilege and spiritual responsibility. The act of maintaining the knives was itself a ritual, a daily reaffirmation of the relationship between mortal hands and sacred purpose. Every mark left on the obsidian carries a fragment of intent, a shadow of the hands that shaped them. Carvings and inlays on handles speak to the fusion of artistry and function, each design chosen for symbolism rather than ornament alone. Some depict animals associated with gods of war, others geometric patterns representing cycles of time and rebirth. The knives' silent stories endure in the material, offering glimpses of ritual practices that remain largely hidden from the historical record. In studying these details, historians and archaeologists glimpse a world in which violence, beauty, and belief were inseparable. Even now, the knives hold a quiet authority, their presence felt in museums, temples, and excavated earth alike. Observers sense an intangible weight, a lingering reminder that these objects were instruments of power, control, and devotion. Their influence stretches across centuries, challenging modern understanding of ritual, devotion, and the intersection of life and death. The obsidian edges reflect more than light, they catch the shadows of memory that continue to haunt the spaces where the Aztecs once walked. The obsidian edges seem to whisper secrets of ceremonies never fully recorded, leaving traces of power that still unsettle those who study them. The Eagle Warrior's initiation. A heavy stillness hung over the stone courtyard as dawn broke across Tenochtitlan, sunlight glinting off obsidian and feathered adornments, casting elongated shadows that seemed to move with the rhythm of the city itself. The air was sharp with the scent of smoke from burning copal, mingling with the earthy odor of sweat as young men prepared themselves for the trials ahead. Muscles tensed, bodies coiled like springs as the initiates practiced the rigorous drills that would mark the beginning of their transformation into eagle warriors. Their movements were precise and deliberate, a language of survival that only the chosen could speak. Each thrust of a wooden sword or leap over a pit of sharpened stakes, sharpening not just skill, but focus and nerve. Bright feathers and gleaming armor signaled more than status. They embodied the spirit of Huitzilopochtli, the sun and war deity whose favor was believed to grant strength in battle. Symbols etched into shields and headdresses carried histories of conquest and devotion, silently reminding every initiate that they were stepping into a legacy far greater than themselves. Challenges came swiftly. Initiates faced long marches across uneven stone causeways, tests of balance along narrow platforms above water, and combat simulations that left no room for hesitation. Each trial was designed to push the body to exhaustion and the mind to clarity, stripping away doubt and fear. The harshness of these tasks ensured that only those who could endure both pain and uncertainty would rise to the rank of Eagle Warrior, guardians of the Empire's might. Commands issued in deep, resonant voices guided the young men through rituals that seemed almost hypnotic in their repetition. Every instruction carried weight beyond the physical, shaping not only actions, but the psyche of the initiates. These lessons were whispered through the centuries, often recorded only in fragments, their full significance known only to those who had undergone the trials firsthand. Fear coiled tightly in the chests of the trainees as night approached, bringing with it the ceremonial firelight that flickered across the temple walls. The night was a test in itself. Darkness, a teacher that stripped away comfort and forced reliance on instinct, an essential skill for men who would one day enter battle without hesitation. Surroundings were transformed by the rituals, altars lined with offerings, murals depicting legendary battles, and drums that vibrated through stone floors created an atmosphere thick with anticipation. Every surface held meaning, a reminder that the world outside the courtyard existed in parallel with the spiritual realm inside, and that mastery required attention to both planes. Eyes of the elders and veterans scrutinized every movement, silently noting even the smallest lapse in composure or technique. Their judgments were absolute, shaping destinies with a glance or a nod. Transformation unfolded slowly, imperceptibly at first, as the young men absorbed lessons in endurance, combat, and strategy. Limbs became stronger, reflexes sharper, and a keen awareness of the surrounding world emerged. More importantly, the ritual fostered a profound psychological change. instilling the confidence and courage necessary to face both the chaos of war and the expectations of a society that demanded perfection from its protectors. Peril was ever present in the exercises, with weapons sharp and the stakes high, reminding each participant that survival depended on discipline, skill, and unwavering attention. These dangers were not arbitrary. They were the crucible in which raw potential was forged into elite capability, teaching lessons that could not be gleaned from mere instruction. Every success and failure resonated, echoing through memory to inform future choices and actions. Echoes of ceremonial chants and the rhythm of drums filled the courtyards as final assessments commenced, the sounds vibrating in the air like unseen currents of energy. Initiates moved through sequences that tested coordination, bravery, and spiritual alignment, each motion intertwined with tradition. Only those who passed through every trial, unbroken, emerged with the recognition that they had joined an order steeped in history, mystique, and martial excellence. The culmination of the initiation left traces beyond the body, a quiet, palpable shift in demeanor, the subtle alignment of confidence and awareness that distinguished the eagle warrior from all others. As dawn broke again, light glinting off obsidian, feathers, and sharpened edges, the initiates who remained stood ready, transformed by trials that few could endure. A single piercing cry rose over the city as the new eagle warriors completed their final ritual, signaling not an end, but a threshold into a life where skill, courage, and devotion would be tested in ways few could imagine. The whistles of death, echoing across the canyons of Oaxaca, a high-pitched whistle carried through the air, sharp enough to halt conversation and chill the spine. For centuries, villagers reported hearing these eerie sounds without seeing their source, a phenomenon that blurred the line between natural acoustics and something far more sinister. The whistle seemed to announce itself in the most unexpected moments, rising from the wind or the rocks themselves, leaving listeners questioning whether they had imagined it. Reports from villagers spoke of sudden silences that followed the sound, moments when birds stilled and dogs crouched low, ears pinned as if the entire landscape awaited the next note. Some claimed the whistle had a rhythm that mirrored human breathing, slow and deliberate, yet capable of quickening into frantic bursts that left hearts racing. Those who heard it described an inexplicable tension, a sense that unseen eyes were tracking every movement. Carved into obsidian and bone, small instruments lay hidden in caves and shrines, their existence hinted at in old oral histories. Scholars have discovered fragments of flutes and whistles in pre-Columbian sites, their precise construction suggesting a purpose beyond music. The artifacts were often discarded or buried deliberately, as though their creators feared the power that each note could unleash. Night brought a chilling clarity. As darkness fell, the whistle became sharper, slicing through the stillness like a blade. Travelers and shepherds in remote areas reported that the sound appeared to follow them, drifting from hilltop to valley, impossible to pinpoint. Shadows seemed to lengthen and twist with each echo, creating a landscape where fear and reality intertwined. Priests recorded omens in codices, noting the shrill notes alongside visions of death and misfortune. The sound was tied to rituals, offerings, and warnings, often linked to celestial events or seasonal changes. The manuscripts indicate that the whistles were treated as sacred instruments, capable of both communicating with deities and signaling impending calamity. The wind seemed to carry voices that were not human, a resonance that seeped into bones and lingered long after the sound faded. People reported feelings of nausea, vertigo, and sudden weakness during these moments, a physical response that could not be explained by simple acoustics. The phenomenon suggested a power that transcended the ordinary senses. Children whispered stories of unseen figures following the sound, describing hooded shapes and shadowy hands that appeared whenever the whistle was heard. The tales were passed down in secret, a mixture of fright and awe, teaching younger generations both caution and reverence for what lay beyond human understanding. Colonial accounts described strange deaths coinciding with the whistles, noting that some men succumbed to terror or inexplicable ailments, shortly after hearing the sound. Friars and chroniclers recorded attempts to interpret the phenomenon, often dismissing it as superstition, while inadvertently preserving details that align with indigenous warnings and premonitions. Survivors claimed the sound could drive men to madness, a creeping obsession that made them wander alone into forests or cliffs, drawn by an irresistible compulsion. Those who resisted the lure often found themselves marked by persistent nightmares and trembling, a testament to the whistle's enduring psychological impact. Instruments disappeared as quickly as they were discovered, vanishing from temples, caves, and private collection. Theories suggest that their removal was deliberate, perhaps to prevent misuse, though the reasons remain obscured by centuries of lost knowledge. Each disappearance added another layer of mystery to the already fearsome reputation of the whistles. Rituals were performed to ward off the deadly notes, involving incense, chants, and offerings of food and precious stones. Communities learned to anticipate the whistle, attempting to appease forces unseen, while simultaneously fearing that any misstep could provoke its return. These ceremonies persisted long after the original meanings were forgotten, a cultural echo of the power embedded in sound. Even today, hikers in remote gorges report an eerie, piercing whistle that cannot be traced to any known source. Researchers and adventurers have attempted to record it, only to find the instruments or echoes vanish without explanation. The continuity of the phenomenon suggests a presence that endures beyond human memory. Some scholars suggest the whistles were warnings designed to protect or punish, a language of sound that carried both terror and instruction. Their precise intention may never be known, but the echoes across centuries hint at a deliberate and enigmatic purpose, one that bridges myth, ritual, and lived experience. The echoes fade into the distance, leaving questions unanswered, and the wind carries the haunting reminder that the sound has not relinquished its claim on those who wander too close. The disappearance of Moctezuma's treasure. Records suggest that when Hernan Cortez entered Tenochtitlan in 1519, he encountered treasures of staggering wealth, meticulously gathered by Moctezuma II. Gold, silver, jade, and intricately crafted ornaments were catalogued in contemporary accounts, each piece a symbol of Aztec power and devotion. What became of this trove after the siege remains one of history's most tantalizing mysteries, a trail that disappears into the fog of conquest and human greed. Whispers among soldiers describe convoys of treasure hastily moved through narrow causeways, guarded by men who vanished into the surrounding mountains. The tension between rumor and fact has fueled centuries of speculation, keeping explorers and historians alike searching for any tangible trace. An inventory once listed chest upon chest of gold dust, necklaces of carved jade, and ceremonial knives of pure silver. These ledgers, recorded by Spanish officials, hint at both the volume of the treasure and the haste with which it was concealed. Legend holds that certain pieces, particularly the heaviest gold artifacts, were spirited away to secret mountain hideouts, protected by local nobles who refused to surrender them. Oral histories speak of families sworn to secrecy, passing knowledge from one generation to the next, a clandestine chain that may have safeguarded fragments of Moctezuma's wealth. Maps discovered in Spanish archives hint at possible burial sites, faint sketches indicating islands, caverns, and hidden docks along the lakeshore. The maps themselves seem to shift in meaning with each reading, a cryptic guide that refuses to reveal its secrets fully. A sudden raid, described in an eyewitness account from 1521, saw a portion of the treasure seized by soldiers, while others were scattered by fleeing Aztec retainers. The confusion allowed some valuables to vanish entirely, perhaps hidden beneath the foundations of destroyed buildings or cast into the lake itself. This fleeting moment of chaos has left historians debating which riches were truly captured and which vanished before anyone could record them. In the archives, letters from Cortez and his captains reveal both obsession and frustration. They detail treasure taken, treasure accounted for, and treasure lost, creating a fragmented story that reads like a puzzle with missing pieces. Scholars have pored over these documents, trying to reconcile the records with archaeological evidence, yet definitive answers remain elusive. Accounts differ regarding the ultimate scale of Moctezuma's hidden wealth. Some chroniclers claimed unimaginable tonnage, describing vaults brimming with solid gold, while others suggested far more modest holdings. The truth likely lies somewhere between the extremes, but the lack of concrete evidence allows imagination to dominate, turning every supposed clue into a tantalizing possibility. Fragments of gold have surfaced over the centuries, often in the form of small artifacts unearthed near ancient ruins. Museums in Mexico City and private collections around the world hold pieces identified as originating from Moctezuma's time, yet none can be definitively traced to his personal holdings. Each artifact hints at a larger story, a puzzle scattered across space and time. Some chroniclers believed that secret passages beneath the palace floors once contained tunnels to underground chambers, a labyrinth designed to protect the most precious items from invaders. Excavations have revealed only partial corridors and collapsed rooms, suggesting that if such chambers existed, they were largely destroyed or concealed beyond recovery. Hidden compartments in temples and nobles' homes are suspected of containing remnants of the treasure, perhaps so well concealed that no modern technology has yet detected them. Excavations in the central city often turn up unexpected findings, ceremonial objects, human remains, or ordinary household items, but the larger caches remain absent, a silent testament to the skill and urgency of those who hid them. Attempts to recover Moctezuma's treasure in later centuries have ranged from scholarly inquiries to reckless treasure hunts, some ending in tragedy or scandal. Adventurers and opportunists alike were drawn by tales of unimaginable wealth, yet most found only disappointment, reinforcing the legend that the treasure was meant to remain beyond human reach. Today, the trail of gold and jewels remains faint, scattered across historical documents, fragments of artifacts, and whispered legends. Even modern archaeological techniques have failed to yield definitive results, leaving scholars and enthusiasts searching for connections in what may be a deliberately obscured puzzle. The ultimate fate of Moctezuma's treasure continues to confound, a story of opulence, chaos, and cunning that stretches across centuries, waiting for discovery in places still hidden from the eyes of the world. The maps of the Aztec underworld. Ancient pigments trace a labyrinth of shadowed realms, where the invisible borders between the living and the dead are etched with meticulous care. Each line and curve carries meaning, signaling dangers, trials, and passageways that few were meant to traverse. The precision of the drawings suggests a deep understanding of both the physical and spiritual landscapes of central Mexico, preserved in symbols that defy straightforward interpretation. Twisting corridors, drawn with precision, suggest a world beneath the living, where tunnels wind into darkness and rivers flow upside down, guided by the unseen hand of divine law. The maps depict caves that vanish into the earth, mountains that split to reveal hidden chambers, and thresholds marked by the spirits of the dead. Observers cannot help but feel that these representations were intended to be studied, not simply glanced at, requiring both reverence and careful contemplation to avoid catastrophe. Before each ceremonial journey, priests studied the hidden roots, memorizing every contour and symbol with painstaking discipline. Their initiation involved both instruction and trial, for one misstep could invite spiritual peril. Codices describe rites in which novices were blindfolded and led through symbolic enactments, learning the significance of rivers that might both carry and drown the unwary, and tunnels that could lead to enlightenment or eternal wandering. The maps were living guides, as dangerous as they were instructive. Sheets of amate reveal mysteries long concealed, their surfaces painted with reds, blacks, and ochres that pulse with meaning even after centuries. The patterns are not merely artistic, they encode instructions, boundaries, and the locations of thresholds that mark transitions between the mundane and the sacred. Scholars studying these sheets note that the spacing of lines, the orientation of glyphs, and even the layering of pigment could convey information as critical as any spoken instruction. Along the outskirts of Tenochtitlan, subtle markings indicate thresholds between realms, where the mortal world and the underworld overlap. Certain landmarks, rivers, and hills are consistently referenced, suggesting that the maps are anchored in geography, yet the paths they trace bend and twist impossibly, hinting at a supernatural topology. Travelers guided by these signs were said to encounter spirits, visions, and trials designed to test courage, wisdom, and reverence. Glyphs painted in striking patterns warn of perils and spiritual trials, each symbol a signpost to the vigilant observer. Some indicate creatures or forces that would test the worthiness of a soul, while others mark safe passages or places to offer tribute. Variations in line thickness, new glyphs, and different orientations suggest that the underworld itself was not static, but alive and responsive. The maps became both records and instruments, documenting spiritual geography while simultaneously shaping it, a dynamic interaction between human devotion and divine structure. Modern researchers attempt to decode networks of intertwining symbols, yet every attempt meets with frustration. Even the most carefully preserved codices offer contradictions, gaps, and ambiguous signs. Lines intersect where they cannot. Water appears to flow uphill, and tunnels curve around spaces that do not exist. These distortions challenge interpretation, suggesting that the maps may encode not just spatial information, but spiritual truth, accessible only to those trained in the hidden arts of divination and ritual. Some sheets were intentionally destroyed, leaving gaps in collective memory that may never be filled. These losses deepen the mystery, underscoring the peril inherent in seeking truths that were never intended for all eyes. Red and black lines mark the borders of danger, guiding or misleading the brave, reminding them that the underworld is as much a test of courage as a place of passage. The maps are warnings as much as they are guides, demanding vigilance and respect from anyone who dares follow them. Encoded charts transform ordinary trails into cosmic journeys, connecting ordinary locations with realms beyond sight. The paths they trace lead not just through the land, but through moral and spiritual landscapes, with each turn reflecting choices, responsibilities, and consequences. Those who could read them fully were initiates, intermediaries who navigated both worlds and brought back knowledge and ritual authority. Conflicting symbols across codices suggest rival interpretations among priestly orders, each claiming authority over access to the underworld. Disputes may have been theological, political, or both, shaping the maps themselves through edits, additions, and obfuscations. The underworld, like the maps, was contested, a realm defined by both its physical and social dimension. Occasionally, coded markers hint at hidden relics or sacred treasures along the way, objects imbued with spiritual power, some still undiscovered. The map's final purpose remains hidden, offering guidance to some while confounding others, their full meaning never entirely grasped and perhaps never meant to be. Whispers of long-forgotten paths echo through the surviving codices, suggesting that the underworld's secrets remain just out of reach, waiting for eyes attuned to both the mortal and the divine. The whispering skulls of Chalpelec. Through the mist, the skulls seem to pulse with a presence that defies explanation, their hollow eyes catching the pale light in ways that suggest awareness. Moss clings to their surfaces, and the stone's contours appear sharper when viewed from certain angles, creating illusions of movement as though the skulls shift slightly when unobserved. A sudden chill sweeps the plaza where the stones lie, as if air itself carries messages that pierce the skin. Visitors have reported goosebumps and a pressure against their chests, sometimes accompanied by faint, unintelligible murmurs that fade when one tries to focus on their origin. Birds and insects fall silent nearby, enhancing the impression that something unseen reacts to human presence, watching and listening with deliberate intent. In hidden alcoves, shadows cling to the edges of the skulls, forming shapes no eye can fully discern. The niches cast intricate patterns on the surrounding walls, resembling abstract glyphs that echo forgotten rites. Across centuries, Travelers have reported voices that rise in patterns too deliberate to be accidental. Accounts from 17th century chroniclers describe guides leading explorers to the stones only to hear whispers warning of unseen dangers. Some even recorded fleeting phrases resembling prayers or curses, though language has shifted so drastically that precise meanings are lost to time. When torches flicker, the temperature shifts unnaturally, accompanied by a sound that cannot be traced. People nearby report feeling sudden vertigo or a sense of being pulled toward the skulls, as though the air itself carries an unspoken command, teasing perception beyond the rational. Among scattered relics, tiny fissures in the stone appear to hum faintly under certain conditions. Moisture, wind, and the angle of sunlight seem to produce vibrations resonating like the low tones of an organ. Scholars attempting acoustic analysis note that these vibrations vary subtly with weather and time of day, adding another layer of inexplicable complexity to the stone's behavior. Outside the reach of daylight, the atmosphere thickens, and murmurs seem to gather into intelligible tones that suggest phrases rather than random sound. Occasionally, listeners describe hearing short, melodic intonations, rising and falling, as if the stones themselves were speaking in a cadence understood only by those sensitive enough to perceive it. From the outer edges of the hill, faint chanting is sometimes heard, vanishing when one moves closer. The effect suggests that the location was deliberately chosen, enhancing the auditory impact for those participating in ceremonial observances. Historical scribes noted mysterious rituals where the skulls were central to prophecies or judgment. Codices reference gatherings of priests performing rites beneath the open sky, sometimes in synchronization with astronomical events. These records hint that the stones were not merely decorative, but functioned as instruments of divine communication, linking mortal acts to celestial forces. As rain falls, droplets strike the stones, and some say the reverberations mimic human speech, producing a chorus of faint whispers and rhythmic patterns. Near ancient stairways, investigators have recorded signals that appear only when silence is absolute. Using sensitive microphones and sound measuring devices, researchers captured short, repeating pulses that emerge from no visible source. The pattern is irregular yet coherent, hinting at an intelligence behind the phenomenon, or at least a system so sophisticated that its design defies understanding. Through decades of inquiry, no consistent explanation has emerged for the sound's origin or pattern. Anthropologists, acousticians, and historians alike have suggested theories ranging from natural resonance to elaborate trickery, yet none accounts fully for the range, timing, and specificity of the sounds. The skulls remain a puzzle, resisting classification and challenging modern assumptions about history and perception. At nightfall, a feeling of being watched is commonly reported, coinciding with strange auditory phenomena. Visitors often describe an oppressive awareness, a sensation that the stones observe, judge, and react, heightening the tension and deepening the enigma. Inside the museum storage, skulls kept from public view reportedly emit soft tones during certain hours. Staff members over the decades have logged subtle vibrations, sometimes occurring in rhythmic sequences resembling a chant. These private recordings suggest that the stone's peculiar properties are not limited to the open plaza, but may be intrinsic to the material itself. Across generations of oral tradition, the sounds are described as warnings, advice, or lamentations. Even under careful observation, visitors report experiences that defy scientific explanation, leaving the skull's secrets intact. Elders recount that those who disrespect the stones may hear sudden, sharp whistles or muffled commands, reinforcing their role as guardians of a knowledge no outsider is meant to grasp. Even under careful observation, the air seems to hum with a presence older than the stones themselves, as if the skulls remember what mortals have long forgotten and guard it jealously. The mysterious death of Moctezuma II. Tenochtitlan's streets thrummed with unease as the emperor faced an impossible choice between loyalty to his people and the demands of the Spanish. Crowds pressed into plazas, their movements tense and restless, sensing that the air itself had grown heavy with uncertainty. Every corner of the city seemed to hold a whispered warning, yet no one could grasp the full scope of what was unfolding. Behind palace walls, tension mounted, with courtiers and soldiers whispering of danger that could strike without warning. Moctezuma II's advisors debated how best to respond, torn between obedience to the invaders and protection of sacred traditions. Voices from the terraces reported a sudden confrontation that would seal the fate of the Aztec ruler. Spanish accounts describe a crowd pressing against the palace, stones and projectiles hurled in fury, while the emperor stood between warring forces. Each report varies, leaving historians unsure whether he was struck by the people's anger or by unseen hands within his own palace. Objects once sacred now lay scattered, hinting at panic and disorder in the final hours. Shields, ornamental headdresses, and ceremonial weapons were displaced as the palace became a stage of chaos. Scholars note that the disruption of these sacred items could have symbolized both spiritual and political collapse, compounding the mystery of his death. Torches flickered in dim hallways, casting long shadows that concealed figures and actions. Any clarity that might have come from witness observation was swallowed by darkness, leaving only speculation and the faint echoes of disturbance. The clatter of sandals echoed through empty halls as attendants carried messages and orders, each step fraught with fear. Some accounts suggest Moctezuma attempted to assert control, calling for calm and negotiation. Yet the rapidly shifting allegiances of both Spaniards and Aztec nobles rendered these efforts ineffective. Every command seemed to vanish into confusion before it could take hold. Confusion reigned over the emperor's precise location during critical moments, obscuring any definitive account. Chroniclers disagree on whether he was confined to the palace, removed to a balcony, or in transit between rooms when the fatal blows occurred. The absence of consistent testimony only deepens the veil of uncertainty around his final hours. Doors barred and unbarred suggest that access to Moctezuma was controlled, yet not secure enough to prevent tragedy. Some historians theorize that loyal attendants sought to protect him, while others believe opportunists exploited security gaps. This ambiguity allows multiple, conflicting narratives to persist, none entirely verifiable. Blood traces on stone stairways offer a silent, haunting clue to the violence that unfolded. Whether these marks came from projectiles, personal assault, or accident remains debated. Their presence, however, underscores the intensity of the events and serves as a grim reminder that the emperor's death was not peaceful or ceremonious. Official reports from foreign envoys speak of rumors that conflicted with direct observation, further clouding reality. Letters from Hernan Cortez and other conquistadors attempt to justify Moctezuma's death as accidental or the result of mob fury, yet their political bias leaves more questions than answers. The ceremonial regalia meant to project power may have made Moctezuma a target or hindered his movements, turning symbols of authority into instruments of vulnerability. The significance of these items remains debated among scholars. The sound of shouting carried across plazas, leaving witnesses uncertain whether anger, grief, or command had caused the violence. Some describe the emperor addressing the crowd, others claim the Spanish spoke on his behalf. The discordant testimonies reflect a city in turmoil where memory and record diverge at every turn. Passageways and balconies contained hidden perspectives, where some historians believe critical actions took place. Observers from these vantage points recorded fragments of motion and gesture, yet their observations were incomplete, leaving gaps that fuel enduring speculation about the sequence of events. Letters preserved in archives hint at Spanish attempts to frame the narrative, revealing bias and uncertainty alike. Cortez and others emphasize the emperor's alleged compliance or culpability, while native accounts framed his death as a betrayal or a sacrificial act imposed by invaders. The contradictions persist, creating a story with no single authoritative voice. A ripple of disbelief spread through the populace, cementing Moctezuma's death as both fact and enduring enigma. Some believed he was murdered deliberately, others that he was struck accidentally, while many saw his end as a portent for the empire's collapse. Even centuries later, the tension between history and myth continues to fuel fascination. Questions persist that no artifact, manuscript, or testimony has fully resolved, keeping the mystery alive through centuries. Every stone, corridor, and written account offers clues that refuse to coalesce into certainty. The shadow of Moctezuma II's final moments remains unbroken, as if the city itself refuses to reveal the truth. The smoking mirror of Hernan Cortez, shimmering in dim light, the mirror projected distortions that unsettled even the most seasoned observers, its polished surface bending the air around it as if reality itself were reluctant to conform. Time had etched subtle imperfections into the glass, minute fissures and clouded streaks that seemed to pulse with memory, recording more than any historian could trace. A faint haze clung to its surface during ceremonies, curling upward as if it was smoke rising from some unseen fire, a signal that those who approached were entering a threshold not entirely of this world. Reflections twisted unnaturally, creating visions that appeared almost familiar, yet shifted with every blink, forcing the eye to question whether what was seen was memory, illusion, or something far stranger. Strange warmth radiated from the artifact, perceptible even across the room, carrying a sensation both comforting and threatening, as though the mirror were aware of each presence in its vicinity. When Cortez approached, an intangible tension filled the air, pressing upon those nearby with an invisible weight that made even seasoned soldiers hesitate and glance nervously at one another. Hidden chambers preserved writings describing the mirror's effects, documenting lights that danced without source, sudden chills that seemed to trail fingertips, and movements in the corners of vision that vanished when looked at directly. Nearby objects occasionally shifted subtly, their edges and angles warped by forces that no observer could measure, leaving them to wonder if the mirror was merely reflecting or actively shaping reality. Stories circulated among those who had seen it, warning that the glass revealed truths no mortal mind could safely hold, and that prolonged exposure could leave perception frayed and memory unreliable. Throughout the campaigns of conquest, the mirror accompanied Hernan Cortez, carried from city to city, leaving an aura of unease in every palace, temple, and hall it entered. Remnants of ritual offerings, beads, feathers, and ash were consistently found nearby, evidence that those familiar with its history continued practices meant to honor, manipulate, or appease its unknown power. Thunderstorms and flickering torches often coincided with the mirror's presence, amplifying its uncanny influence and producing an atmosphere that seemed predestined for tension or revelation. Complete silence would descend when the mirror was uncovered, an unnatural hush that even the most hardened veterans described as suffocating, a quiet that seemed to wait for some act of recognition. Fear and fascination intertwined as observers debated whether the images reflected by the mirror were actual events, distorted truths, or glimpses of worlds beyond comprehension. Heat and faint odors accompanied its presence, sometimes described as the scent of smoldering earth, smoke, or unidentifiable incense, affecting all who lingered too close. Morning light striking the surface produced sudden flares and glimmers that documented diaries recorded with meticulous precision, yet no onlooker could reliably recall the shape or subject of the reflections afterward. Voices of multiple languages seemed to echo from within the glass, layered and indistinct, never belonging to any single living person, producing unease and speculation about whether the mirror absorbed and replayed sounds across time. Its fate after Cortez's campaigns remains unknown, leaving scholars, collectors, and historians to question whether it was hidden, destroyed, or continues to exist quietly, influencing events beyond observation. Power and terror were entwined in every account, a reminder that this object, unlike any other, was not merely ceremonial or decorative. Its presence, whenever noted in correspondence or journals, coincided with moments of dread, confusion, or inexplicable outcomes, prompting repeated warnings to handle it with care and respect. The mirror's allure endured because it offered glimpses of truths that were not meant to be fully understood, teasing perception with fragments that resisted complete comprehension. Even as centuries passed, speculation persisted regarding the mirror's origin, whether it had been crafted by masterful artisans alone or with guidance from forces unknown to ordinary mortals. Each sighting suggested an intelligence beyond human design, an uncanny ability to interact with those who approached in ways that could not be predicted or controlled. Across continents and centuries, the mirror remains a silent witness, a relic whose presence whispers of secrets too profound for full disclosure, and whose very surface may still hold the power to reveal more than anyone could survive knowing. The lost tunnels of Tenochtitlan. Shadows curl along the walls of the stone corridors, forming shapes that shift in the torchlight, suggesting hidden chambers whose purposes have been erased by time. The passage narrows, forcing careful steps, while the faint scent of damp earth and mineral-rich water presses against the senses, a reminder that these tunnels were once alive with human movement. Water has carved tiny rivulets along the floors, hinting at floods that once coursed through these subterranean routes, leaving traces of a civilization that learned to live with both danger and secrecy. Torchlight flickers, catching faint glyphs carved into the walls, their edges softened by centuries of exposure to moisture and dust. Symbols depict warriors, serpents, and celestial motifs, some recognizable, others indecipherable, suggesting ritual significance or coded instructions for those who understood their meaning. Ancient bricks shift slightly under the pressure of time, some loosened by centuries of decay, creating small gaps that hint at spaces beyond the visible. In these interstices, shadows pool like liquid, hiding unknown objects or passages, and compelling any observer to question what might remain undiscovered. A distant drip echoes through the corridors, resonating in irregular patterns that almost form a rhythm, as if the tunnels themselves are keeping a slow, deliberate count of the centuries. Footsteps seem to vanish or reappear unexpectedly, and the walls reverberate with noises that may or may not be human, blurring the line between reality and imagination. Every sound becomes a warning, a whisper, or a lure into unseen chambers. In corners where dust gathers thickly, impressions of tools and containers suggest lives lived briefly or abruptly interrupted. Objects lie half buried in dirt, their purposes enigmatic, yet their presence indicates human activity, whether for ritual, defense, or secrecy. The accumulation of centuries presses upon the mind, giving weight to every observation and every hesitation. Cold drafts wind through narrow vents, unsettling the senses and carrying echoes from spaces just out of reach. The air itself seems to communicate, shifting in temperature and texture, hinting at openings higher or lower in the structure. The corridors respond subtly to intrusion, a dynamic environment where walls, air, and sound interact in ways that defy modern comprehension. Stalactites descend from the ceiling in jagged clusters, their mineral growths forming natural barriers that must be navigated carefully. Some appear to guard side passages, others to mark the end of a tunnel, each formation silently recording centuries of undisturbed presence. Their shadows play tricks on the eyes, and the mind struggles to discern between stone and opening. Colonial records note subterranean routes beneath Tenochtitlan, describing secret passageways used to escape sieges or to transport valuables unseen, though the specifics conflict widely. Some chronicles hint at chambers containing treasure, others emphasize defensive purposes, and yet others suggest spaces for rituals known only to select priests or warriors. The multiplicity of accounts adds to the uncertainty, ensuring that definitive answers remain elusive. Watermarks rise along walls in areas that show historical flooding, marking years when underground rivers or rainfall breached the city's defenses. These scars are faint yet unmistakable, testifying to both the ingenuity and vulnerability of the engineers who built the tunnels. Each mark is a reminder that the structures were not purely ceremonial, but functional, shaped by practical needs and environmental forces. Certain sections collapse or have been blocked over time, leaving gaps that hint at entirely inaccessible chambers. These obstructions serve both as natural barriers and deliberate safeguards, obscuring what might lie beyond from all but the most determined explorers. The debris itself becomes a puzzle, suggesting stories of sudden abandonment or protective sealing. Symbols etched in stone mark subtle transitions between chambers, with patterns that seem to carry coded instructions for navigation, survival, or ritual. Some are geometric, others resemble creatures or objects whose meanings are lost. Scholars debate their significance, but the prevailing sense is that they were intended for those who could read not only shapes, but the intentions behind them. Sounds carry in strange ways underground, transforming simple drops of water into whispers or footsteps into warnings. The interplay of acoustics, shape, and silence can deceive even experienced observers, creating the impression of voices or movement where none exists. The effect is disorienting, yet impossible to ignore, reinforcing the tunnel's mysterious character. At the far end of a narrowing corridor, the stone walls converge into darkness too dense to see through, leaving speculation as the only guide. Every step taken toward this terminus deepens the sense of unknown, as though the tunnels were designed to challenge perception itself. Explorers confront not only physical obstacles, but the psychological weight of centuries of hidden existence. Dust stirs as if alive, rising in faint clouds when disturbed, carrying the memory of countless footsteps, ceremonies, and hurried retreats. It clings to skin and clothing, leaving traces of the underground world on those who enter, a reminder that even fleeting contact leaves a permanent impression. Beneath the streets of modern Mexico City, the lost tunnels of Tenochtitlan whisper with the weight of centuries, hiding secrets that may never be fully revealed. The feathered serpent's enigma. On the jagged summit of the temple, the feathered serpent rises with a presence that seems almost alive, its carved scales glinting in the sunlight like fragments of green and gold fire. Wind twists through the soaring columns, carrying with it the faint scent of earth and something older, something that belonged to rituals long abandoned. These carvings are more than decoration. They are statements of power and belief, coded messages preserved in stone that may never be fully deciphered. These spaces, now empty, exude a silent warning, a suggestion that the temple was built with knowledge meant to protect or conceal. Archaeologists have noted subtle differences in the stone's wear, indicating frequent movement by figures who might have known paths that remain invisible to casual exploration. The passages narrow and widen without apparent reason, forming a labyrinth of ritual pathways. Ceremonial altars bear traces of forgotten rituals, the remains of offerings and burnt incense clinging to surfaces in a faint, enduring residue. Even absence of observers, the temple exudes an aura of significance that continues to challenge interpretation. It is a silence heavy with anticipation, and for moments the outside world seems to dissolve, leaving only the temple and its guardian. This quiet amplifies even the smallest sounds, the scraping of footsteps, the rustle of a leaf transforming ordinary noise into a chorus of subtle warnings. Feathers, once vibrant, now lie brittle and faded across the floors, remnants of ceremonial regalia or symbolic adornments. Their decay mirrors the passage of time and the fragility of human intention against the permanence of stone. The colors that remain still catch light in unexpected ways, offering fleeting glimpses of the ceremonies that must have once filled this space with movement and sound. Sculpted eyes gleam under shifting light, catching the observer's gaze with an intensity that is impossible to dismiss. The serpent seems to watch from every angle, each glance a reminder that the builders intended a presence beyond mere aesthetics. The precision of the carving suggests a deep understanding of perspective, one that continues to affect anyone standing within its line of sight. These reverberations carry the memory of movement, hinting at rituals of passage or trials that may have been enacted for the initiated. The echo becomes part of the structure itself, entwined with the architecture to create an immersive experience for those who dare enter. Water channels run dry but hint at ancient flow, connecting sections of the temple that today seem isolated. These conduits, carefully engineered, suggest a symbolic or functional purpose tied to purification or ceremonial display. Layers of stone carry secrets of countless hands, each stacked upon the last in precise alignment. Every block represents knowledge and labor, its placement deliberate, perhaps marking celestial or spiritual phenomena. The weight of history is tangible here, felt in the pressure of stone and the unspoken narratives embedded in its form. The lingering scent evokes memory without words, a ghostly testament to devotion and reverence that continues to resonate within the temple walls. Carvings twist in shapes that defy immediate comprehension, creating visual riddles whose solutions may lie in forgotten lore. The patterns evoke movement, transformation, and power, leaving observers to wonder whether the intent was symbolic, instructional, or both. The ambiguity enhances the mystery, compelling study, yet resisting definitive interpretation. This perspective emphasizes the structure's dominance and the temple's role as a connector between earthly and celestial realms, both physical and metaphysical. Their presence is subtle, yet they anchor the temple in human history, signaling devotion that bridges centuries even as the original meanings fade. Stone serpents coil toward the heavens with deliberate symmetry, a choreography frozen in rock. Each curve and spiral suggests movement and purpose, capturing the eye and imagination alike. Their presence dominates the architecture, commanding attention and respect through their form alone. The interplay of light and shadow animates the stone, creating the impression of motion where there is none. This fleeting brilliance transforms mundane observation into revelation, however brief. Wind carries a distant, indistinct chant, a sound that is almost human yet cannot be traced. It weaves through corridors and across plazas, leaving the impression of a ritual still alive, echoing from a time long past. Within the temple's silent shadows, the feathered serpent waits, its enigma untouched by time. The hidden symbolism of Aztec masks. In the heart of Tenochtitlan, where marketplaces once bustled with color and sound, Aztec artisans were quietly shaping objects that would hold secrets beyond the understanding of most. Among their creations, the masks stand out, carved from turquoise, obsidian, jade, and human bone, each piece astonishing in its detail. The polished surfaces catch the light as if they were alive, while intricate patterns trace spirals, lines, and geometric shapes that seem to pulse with hidden meaning. Scholars have long debated their purpose, yet each mask seems to carry a language of symbols, a visual code meant for eyes attuned to a world now lost. Masks were not mere decoration. They were worn during ceremonies that invoked gods, demanded protection, or celebrated victories. Some were designed to represent deities such as Tezcatlipoca, the god of night and destiny, or Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent whose presence was believed to guide the cosmos. In museum collections, the turquoise inlays glint with an almost otherworldly brilliance, yet no modern interpretation fully captures what an Aztec priest or warrior might have felt when gazing into one of these sacred creations. Even the choice of materials seems deliberate. Obsidian could reflect the night sky and capture shadows, while jade was associated with life and fertility, and human bone may have carried the essence of sacrifice into the mask's very structure. Though seemingly ordinary, some masks reveal more than the eye can see. Tiny etchings along the edges, almost imperceptible without careful inspection, resemble constellations, serpentine figures, or abstract representations of the underworld. These carvings may have been maps of celestial events, guides for ritual movement, or symbolic pathways for the soul. Archaeologists in the 20th century noted that masks found in burial sites often differed from those worn in ceremonies, suggesting that some were meant to bridge life and death, a tool for communicating with forces beyond the human realm. Each layer of meaning seems deliberately obscured, as if the mask itself guards a secret, only revealing fragments to those who dare to understand. The colors chosen for these masks also held significance. Bright blues and greens could mimic the feathers of sacred birds like the quetzal, linking the wearer to divine creatures, while reds and ochres might symbolize blood, vitality, and sacrifice. When worn during rituals, these colors would have transformed the individual, merging human and divine presence into a single, enigmatic figure. Observers might have seen a mortal face, yet beneath the mask, the spirit of a god or ancestor might have appeared to move among them. the line between reality and ritual becomes hazy, leaving modern viewers with the unsettling impression that the masks were alive with hidden power. Beyond the ceremonial, masks may have functioned as coded statements, marking social rank, clan identity, or spiritual achievement. Certain shapes or patterns recur in masks excavated from different regions of central Mexico, hinting at a shared symbolic language that spanned time and place. Yet the exact meaning remains elusive. Early Spanish chroniclers documented the use of masks in festivals and religious rites, often remarking on the fear and awe they inspired. Yet their descriptions reveal more about European interpretation than Aztec understanding. Modern researchers continue to puzzle over the combination of materials, shapes, and adornments, unsure whether each mask tells a story, conveys a warning, or simply embodies a presence that cannot be translated. Surprisingly, masks were not static. Some could be disassembled, pieces replaced, or jewels added, allowing the artifact to evolve alongside the culture that created it. This adaptability may have been intentional, reflecting the Aztec belief in cycles of life, death, and renewal. The act of wearing a mask, polishing it, or altering it may have been as sacred as the rituals themselves, a quiet devotion expressed through craftsmanship and symbolism. Even fragments recovered from excavation sites suggest this reverence, with cracks and chips carefully repaired rather than discarded, hinting at a culture that saw spiritual power in objects as fragile as they were enduring. Today, when we peer into the hollow eyes of these masks, the past feels simultaneously near and inaccessible. Every polished surface and carved detail seems to whisper of ceremonies, visions, and unseen forces that shaped an empire's understanding of life and death. They are artifacts of a civilization that viewed the world through layers of meaning, each one carefully encoded into stone, bone, and mineral. Despite centuries of study, every mask retains its mystery, a silent enigma that continues to guard the secrets of a people who understood the thin line between the mortal and the divine. Seeming almost alive, some masks watch back as if the stories they contain are waiting for the right moment to be fully revealed. The cosmic alignment of temples. As the sun crests the eastern horizon, its first light falls upon the steps of Templo Mayor, tracing lines that seem impossibly precise. Each shadow stretches across the stone with deliberate care, catching the edges of terraces and altars in patterns that suggest calculation beyond simple construction. The plaza itself becomes a map of the sky, with every axis, corner, and stair aligned to mark the movements of celestial bodies that govern the rhythm of Aztec life. Observers might imagine the architects looking upward, following the path of the sun and stars, translating the heavens into a city that mirrored the cosmos itself. Shadows stretch across the plaza, shifting with the passage of the day, and in their movement, hints of hidden order appear. Some lines converge at points far beyond human measurement, intersecting with hills, rivers, or distant mountains, as if the city itself were a giant instrument for observing the heavens. These intersections are not random. They correspond with solstices, equinoxes, and the rising of particular constellations. Yet the full meaning of this arrangement remains unknown. Even centuries later, the alignment challenges modern understanding of Aztec astronomy and urban planning, suggesting a knowledge encoded in stone that defies simple explanation. Archaeologists have noted that the orientation of certain temples and shrines matches the position of the sun on specific days, including the winter solstice, when light penetrates narrow corridors, illuminating inner chambers with a precision that seems to demand ritual attention. The city's layout, once thought to be practical and defensive, now reveals a spiritual dimension that overlays everyday life with cosmic significance. Steps, platforms, and gateways may have served as instruments, not only for human movement, but for measuring the passage of time and observing phenomena that governed agricultural cycles and sacred festivals. Though centuries have passed, and much of the original city lies buried beneath modern Mexico City, the temples still whisper of intentions that remain beyond reach. Structures rise from the earth, as if guided by unseen hands, their geometry echoing the balance of the heavens above. Streets and plazas form lines that point to distant horizons, where the sun rises or sets in perfect synchrony with ceremonial spaces. The precision of these alignments, maintained across generations, implies a system of knowledge cultivated over decades or even centuries, an expertise that combined observation, ritual, and architectural mastery. When moonlight washes over the northern terraces, it seems to awaken patterns hidden in daylight. Carved surfaces catch the pale glow, revealing subtle angles and indentations invisible under the harsh Sunday. These nocturnal illuminations may have marked lunar events, sacred nights, or rituals timed to celestial occurrences, yet their exact purpose remains a mystery. Scholars continue to study these effects, photographing and modeling the angles, yet each discovery raises new questions, deepening the sense that the temples themselves were designed as conduits for forces both tangible and elusive. What forces guided the placement of these monumental structures, and what vision dictated their orientation? The city's architects left no written explanation, only the silent testimony of stone aligned to the heavens. Observers today can only marvel at the precision, imagining the ceremonies that unfolded as sunlight and shadow traced intricate patterns across plazas and platforms. These alignments may have been used to signal sacred times, synchronize festivals, or communicate with deities whose names have survived only in fragments, yet the full significance is lost to time. Light shifts continuously throughout the day, painting the terraces in hues that change with the angle of the sunday. Each shift transforms the space, turning ordinary stone into a stage where the divine and mortal intersect. Observers might note how steps become beams of gold at sunrise, or how shadowed corners reveal carvings aligned to specific stars. The interplay between natural phenomena and human design creates an ever-changing spectacle that cannot be fully predicted or reconstructed, offering only fleeting glimpses of knowledge the Aztecs encoded into their city. Priests and rulers may have ascended the temples during precise moments, performing rituals timed to celestial events that dictated agriculture, warfare, and worship. The alignment of structures was not merely functional, it conveyed authority, connected earthly actions to cosmic order, and reinforced the belief that the universe was a web of patterns waiting to be understood. Each temple becomes more than stone, it becomes a statement of intent, a monument to an understanding that stretches beyond the immediate senses. Even today, as sunlight and shadows shift across the ruins, the city retains a presence that feels almost alive. Every terrace, staircase, and plaza suggests careful orchestration, yet the knowledge that guided it remains concealed, a puzzle left by architects whose vision bridged earth and sky. When twilight descends, the temples seem to hold their breath, aligned in silence with stars that have witnessed centuries of secrets. The blood offerings to the Sunday, drums echoed across the plaza, their rhythm vibrating through stone and air, calling every eye toward the towering altar where the sun struck in sharp golden lines. The sound was steady and relentless, a heartbeat that seemed to synchronize with the steps of those who climbed the terraces. Each beat carried meaning, a signal to participants and spectators alike that something beyond the ordinary was about to unfold, a ritual as ancient as the empire itself. A scent of copal incense and heated stone mingled with the metallic tang of iron from the previous day's ceremonies, filling the plaza with a weight that pressed on the senses. The aroma wove between the columns and steps, drifting over the crowd as though the very air had been consecrated for the moment. Birds paused in nearby trees, unsettled by the murmured chants that rippled through the masses, leaving a silence pregnant with anticipation. A priest lifted an obsidian blade, the sunlight glinting sharply along its edge, catching the attention of all who watched. Hands trembled, not from fear alone, but from the gravity of the act about to take place. Each movement was deliberate, precise, rehearsed across countless ceremonies that marked life, death, and devotion. The blade itself seemed to carry the weight of unseen forces, a tool that bridged the mortal world and the divine, capable of drawing the essence of life toward the sky. The carved stone altar bore centuries of marks, some worn smooth by time, others still jagged and darkened by the remnants of countless offerings. Its surface seemed to pulse with memory, a silent chronicle of sacrifices whose meaning was encoded in ritual gestures, placement of the body, and the careful timing of the sun's position. Every groove, indentation, and chip appeared purposeful, a record left in stone that whispered stories of devotion, fear, and the inexorable demands of gods who could not be ignored. Spectators shivered as the chanting swelled, their voices merging into a low, vibrating hum that seemed to make the very ground respond. The air became thick with tension, charged by collective attention and unspoken anticipation. Eyes followed every motion of the priests, noting the angle of arms, the tilt of the head, the path of sunlight over the altar, as though every gesture might reveal secrets of favor or wrath that were otherwise inaccessible. Spanish chroniclers recorded that sacrifices were often performed during festivals such as Tlacaxipehualistli, yet their accounts only hinted at the profound significance these acts held for those who understood the divine code. Captives brought from distant regions of Mesoamerica, their presence both tribute and warning, stood at the center of these ceremonies, their fate intertwined with the rhythm of song, drum, and solar movement. Even the chroniclers could not fully interpret the belief that the sun demanded blood to maintain balance, leaving modern scholars with only fragments of understanding. Despite the brilliance of midday, shadows pooled around the base of the altar, darkening fissures and carving recesses where carvings hinted at ancestral guidance. The light moved with a deliberate rhythm, illuminating some figures while leaving others in darkness, creating a choreography that linked the sun's course to the rituals performed. Every ray seemed timed, every shadow placed as if the earth itself were complicit in guiding the offerings toward unseen powers. Sunlight flickered across ceremonial garments, reflecting on feathered headdresses and polished shields, drawing attention to colors that carried symbolic weight. Red, green, and gold danced in the open air, tying the physical display to abstract forces of life, death, and renewal. The vividness of the colors enhanced the intensity of the moment, amplifying the presence of gods thought to be watching, and reminding all participants that this ritual was an intersection of mortal action and divine expectation. No one could know with certainty whether the gods accepted each offering, or what subtle signs might reveal approval or anger. Yet every movement, every chant, every drop of blood was performed with meticulous care, as if the ritual itself carried power sufficient to command attention beyond human comprehension. Observers might only glimpse the surface of meaning, while the deeper logic remained obscured, buried in patterns that connected life, sun, and sacrifice in ways never fully revealed. As the final chant faded and the sun began its descent, the altar seemed to pulse with quiet energy, the air still vibrating with the echoes of what had occurred. A presence lingered over the stones, heavy and watchful, suggesting that the offerings had not merely concluded, but entered a realm unseen, where the sun and sky would judge their worth. Somewhere beyond the horizon, the light awaited the next act, silent yet insistent, as if keeping score in a language no one alive could read. The enigmatic music of the Aztecs, whistles tore through the plaza, eerie and urgent, bouncing off the stone terraces in unpredictable arcs. The piercing notes cut through the warm morning air, carrying far beyond the Templo Mayor and its surrounding plaza. Listeners flinched at sudden bursts, then leaned forward, compelled by a strange combination of fear and fascination. The sound seemed alive, twisting in unpredictable ways, almost as if it had its own consciousness, responding to the rhythm of the crowd and the sway of ceremonial movements. Mist drifted over the altars, carrying faint echoes of drums and flutes that seemed to twist in the morning air. Tiny droplets clung to carved stone, refracting sunlight into brief, scattered rainbows, as if the atmosphere itself were highlighting the presence of the music. The echoes carried not only sound, but a sense of ritual weight, embedding themselves into the senses of those gathered, leaving no corner of the plaza untouched by the invisible vibrations. Hands moved over hollow instruments, producing notes that mimicked the calls of animals and the sigh of wind. Bone flutes, ceramic whistles, and wooden drums were coaxed into life with careful precision, each instrument seeming to speak a different language, yet harmonizing perfectly with the others. The musicians followed rhythms that were passed down through generations, some known only to a few, creating a performance that merged skill, instinct, and sacred intention in ways modern observers struggle to comprehend. Crowds held their breath, caught between fear, reverence, and the strange allure of the rising melodies. Spectators, both participants and onlookers, were drawn into an invisible web, responding to sound as if it carried commands they could not articulate. Movements synchronized naturally, heads tilted, bodies swayed, and chants occasionally joined the instruments, forming a living harmony that blurred the line between music and magic. Shadows flickered across carved surfaces, dancing in time with each strike of drums and beat of ceremonial sticks. The interplay of light and sound created a spectacle that extended beyond the auditory into the visual, transforming simple stone platforms into stages for something far more elusive. The carved patterns and reliefs appeared to pulse under the influence of the music, as if acknowledging their own participation in a ritual whose true meaning remained hidden. Echoes lingered long after the music ended, settling into corners and crevices, almost as if the plaza itself remembered. The reverberations carried a resonance that could not be measured by volume alone, embedding into memory and space alike. Those who heard it claimed to feel vibrations deep in their chests, a physical reminder that the music was more than sound. It was a force that shaped attention, expectation, and perhaps even belief. Vibrations from the instruments seemed to linger in the walls, as if the stones themselves remembered the ceremonies. Sunlight glinted along polished surfaces, highlighting intricate carvings that corresponded to tones no one could fully explain. The instrument's arrangement, the placement of performers, and the architectural acoustics combined into a system that aligned human action with natural resonance. Some notes lingered unnaturally long, fading slowly as if reluctant to leave the stone terraces, creating intervals and harmonies that modern researchers still struggle to recreate with complete accuracy. Complexity threaded through every rhythm, notes weaving together into patterns that seemed designed to reach beyond the senses. Certain sequences repeated in ways that suggested intentional coding, perhaps echoing cycles of the moon, the movement of celestial bodies, or stories encoded in myth and legend. Every rise and fall of the music carried symbolic weight, yet the language it spoke has been lost to time, leaving only traces that inspire awe and speculation. Silence followed the final chord, thick and expectant, leaving a pulse of mystery hanging over the terraces. Listeners remained frozen, as if the air itself were waiting for a response from forces unseen, a moment when the music's unseen purpose might reveal itself. The instruments sat still, their voices gone but not forgotten, lingering in imagination, memory, and the whisper of wind between the stones. And when night settled over the city, faint echoes seemed to rise from empty plazas, a reminder that the music never fully dies, and the meaning may still be waiting to be heard. The omens of Tenochtitlan's fall. Smoke spiraled unnaturally from distant fires, twisting against the wind in patterns no one could explain. Observers from the city's terraces watched as the plumes coiled and broke apart, forming shapes that seemed deliberate, almost as if the air itself were attempting to communicate. Even those accustomed to ritual fires felt the atmosphere shift, sensing a message that eluded comprehension yet pressed insistently against the mind. Shadows moved oddly across temple walls, lengthening and shortening at impossible angles, as if alive. The carved reliefs appeared to twist in rhythm with the passing sun, and figures standing nearby swore they could see fleeting shapes that were never fully formed. Courtyards felt heavier, as though the city itself was absorbing an invisible tension. The flickering light made every surface uncertain, transforming familiar carvings into cryptic signs that hinted at change or warning. Whispers filled the plazas, citizens murmuring of visions that left them uneasy and fearful. Elders spoke of recurring dreams of distant flames, strange sounds, and foreboding skies. Merchants paused mid-transaction to listen for explanations that never came. Children tugged at their parents' hands, unnerved by shadows that seemed to move against the wind. Every conversation carried fragments of omen, each retelling amplifying the sense of suspense and dread. Rivers foamed with unusual turbulence, as if the waters themselves sensed a looming disaster. The currents shifted unpredictably, carrying debris and mud into areas normally calm and placid. Fishermen pulled nets that were often empty or tangled, and small fish behaved erratically, leaping in unnatural patterns. Birds fell silent in the courtyards, their absence more disturbing than any sound could be. No flock moved across the skyline, no song punctuated the morning air, and crows circled in anxious loops above the city walls. The silence was oppressive, carrying a weight that affected both the living and the senses. Windows and open doors allowed the quiet to seep into the homes and temples alike, leaving spaces filled with a tense anticipation that no explanation could fully satisfy. Priests muttered of visions in temples, recording warnings in glyphs whose meaning terrified even the learned. Their codices spoke of fire in the sky, blood-colored clouds, and unexplainable movements of animals and celestial bodies. Each symbol was painstakingly carved or painted, yet its true purpose remained elusive, a cryptic system of prediction whose key had been lost or never fully understood. People came to the temples seeking guidance, yet often left with more questions than answers, haunted by the impression of forces larger than any mortal could confront. A distant rumble shook the stone foundations, briefly silencing the city and drawing all eyes skyward. Merchants dropped goods, children clung to parents, and even the guards atop walls stiffened in alert. The sound had no identifiable source, too deep for thunder, too low for construction, and its resonance left a lingering vibration that seemed to pulse through every structure. Many whispered that it was a voice from the earth itself, a warning that could not be ignored. Dark clouds gathered abruptly over the Templo Mayor, blotting sunlight and casting shadows that seemed to move on their own. The color of the sky shifted unnaturally, bruised with shades of red and violet that unsettled even the most composed observers. Wind gusts carved through the plazas, sending flags snapping and banners flailing. In the sudden gloom, familiar streets and alleys felt foreign, as if the city had been transformed by forces unseen and unpredictable. Some saw glowing shapes darting along distant ridges, while others reported sparks that vanished before they could be touched. The phenomenon was fleeting, yet repeated enough to unsettle entire neighborhoods. Couriers and travelers spoke of the same strange illumination far from the city center, hinting at a pattern that no one could decipher and adding to the pervasive tension that gripped Tenochtitlan. Citizens, priests, and rulers alike were left watching and waiting, each phenomenon feeding into the next with an unnerving inevitability. Even as the city moved through daily life, an invisible current of apprehension ran beneath every action. The omens remained unresolved, a haunting prelude to events that the city could sense but could not fully confront. Shrouded in twilight, the city fell into an uneasy hush, as if every stone and canal held its breath for what was yet to come.